Okay, thank you so much for the presentation, but thank you to the organizers. It's really wonderful to be here. And it's even more wonderful to talk about something that is really close to my heart. I'm gonna tell you about what keeps me up at night, and that is urban sanitation. That subsector is the one that I think needs a lot of work and is well promising. I have doubts sometimes if we are in the right path. And I'm going to share with you some approach that we are developing with a lot of colleagues from around the world that we're calling citywide inclusive sanitation. And we think that it's very important that we change the way we do business, because otherwise we will not achieve the SDGs. So we all know that the SDGs have drastically changed the way we think about the sector. But when we were in the MDG era, we had achieved a lot of goals. And what happened after 2015 is that many of those who were counted as have meeting the goals were no longer meeting the goals. So no longer are we starting from a lower point, but the SDGs are imposing on us a lot of new challenges that were not part of the MDGs. So we all know that there are higher expectations, but what it means for urban sanitation. And let me clarify that when I refer to urban, I'm not only thinking about the mega cities and the huge slums, I'm also thinking about small towns. So we're moving from halving the amount of people that need access to universal access. We're going beyond having a toilet to adequately managing the sludge, the fecal management from beginning to end, something that not necessarily we were doing. And we're also thinking about that there's the need for resilience, there's the need for environment considerations, and so we also are talking about wastewater treatment. So this requires us to think differently, and we are proposing to think it through the whole service chain. If we don't do that, we won't meet the SDGs. So we need to think beyond our conventional or simplified sewers, just because most of the population don't have access to sewers, and they rely on a latrine or a septic tank or a container, and whatever it is, we're moving from the MDG world to the SDG world, meaning we need to consider the whole service chain regardless of what containment you're using. And to top it up, we also have huge urbanization growth worldwide. And as I said before, we are not starting in a very comfortable position. And so what this means is that the cities are not developing in the way where they were before. So we don't have space. We don't have the luxury of sometimes planning for the nice sewers. And we have to adapt. And we have to serve these people who are in those highly unplanned areas. Sorry. So in the cities, everything is interconnected. And so we cannot have the luxury of thinking about the sanitation solution in abstract. We have to consider the urban space and how it's look like. And this challenges many of our conventional solutions. The challenges are huge. We have more than 700 million people without access to sanitation. But what we also need to consider is what it means for the people who don't have the access. And that means that first, the poor suffer more than the rich, of course, but there's beyond the environmental degradation, the type of diseases that come from the lack of access to sanitation and their impact on the environment, specifically stunting, for example. We just completed a global study that we call the WASH Poverty Diagnostic in 18 countries around the world. And we found that disproportionately are the urban poor, the children of the urban poor who have highest impact of stunting. And again, urban poor includes small towns. So to address those issues that are just an unhealthy environment in many of the cities around the world, we need to consider sanitation not in isolation, but in an integrated manner. It depends on what type of water supply you have. Do you have access to solid waste? Do you have drainage systems? How is the urban landscape? What type of housing? How dense? All those considerations we not necessarily have paid a lot of attention to, but will determine if we are able to achieve the SDGs. So one thing coming from the World Bank that we also lose sleep about is how we're going to finance all this. And the good news in the MDG world was that we were able to triple the amount of resources that went to the water and sanitation sector. So we moved from our about $6 billion per year to about $18 billion per year. The bad news is that our estimates show that we need about $114 billion per year, and the largest share of those resource needs are within the urban sanitation space. So we really need to mobilize new resources, leverage more, but also be smarter in the way we use our resources. So what we face when we work with our clients is that our mayors or ministers, they are interested in very much adopting the SDG approach. So let me show you an example from Maputo. So we went to Maputo, and the mayor wanted us to finance some wastewater treatment plants, which are great because now they will have some of their sewer coming back to the environment in a safe way. However, when we start analyzing the situation in the city, we found that really 90% of the population didn't have access to a sewer system. So while focusing our investments in the treatment, we may have been neglecting the rest of the city and those in most need. But if we think about what's happening in terms of the environmental objective, which was the reason why the mayor wanted to invest in the wastewater treatment, we found that about 43% of those with on-site sanitation were adequately treating their sludge, their fecal sludge. However, only 3% were with those with sewers, so that was their main concern. But the problem wasn't there. And if we had gone with the initial focus, which is good, it's not bad, we were doing the right thing, doing wastewater treatment, we will be neglecting those that don't have anything, those defecating in the open, those with unsafe access to sanitation. And for the environment, we would have been neglecting the largest stream of untreated sludge coming to the environment. So we really need to think it through in a different way. And that's not only an issue in very poor countries. Let me show what we found in Lima, a middle-income country in Latin America. So when we did this exercise for the city as a whole, well, 52% is not that bad compared to what we have found in other places. However, when we look at what was happening in the informal settlements, and that's more than 1 million people, we realized that there was inadequate, and the city didn't have a clue of what to do with those with individual solutions because they were outside of their utility. So their utility was only focusing on these 92% of the population with access to sewers. Again, there were some challenges, but nobody was stopping and thinking about how to deal with those that didn't have access or still don't have access to proper sanitation. So sewer systems are part of the solution, and sewer systems are important because they allowed for densification, and if cities want to be smarter and grow, and there's issues with land consideration, then having sewers allowed for better planning and better and densifying the cities. However, the way our urbanization has happened means that not necessarily we can rely on sewers. But there are lower cost, simplified sewers that we're not using as much as we could. Those could be adaptable, those could go into some of the slum areas, and those would be 30 to 50% lower capital cost than conventional sewers. But we're not doing much about that either. The other part of the solution, of course, is on-site management. And I think we have overly concentrated on building the latrine. First, on the building. So it's about construction and it's about building latrines, and the newspapers report on how many new latrines the country X managed or city Y constructed. But very little are we thinking about what happens to the use of that latrine. And if we are considering reaching the SDGs, and if we are concerned on health issues, the focus is clearly not on building the latrine. And so we need to focus more on effectively management of the fecal sludge and effectively treating and safely disposing. And that creates a big challenge in a city because the city is highly dense. In many places, even if you have the latrine, you don't have access for the truck to come and clean it. And then you have to transport this sludge through the whole city, and imagine all the leakage and all the dirt that is coming to the whole city. So we need to think it through. And the same way that people don't like to have their solid waste landfill in their backyard, they don't want to see all this fecal sludge around in their neighborhood. So if we want to solve these issues, I urge you to think in an integrated way, because what happens is all related. And I think one of the problems we have in the wash sector is that we are overly focusing on our own sanitation sector and neglecting the linkages with the other subsectors. And in urban sanitation, this is very important because we share the same space. So in the Disney world, everything works beautifully, and there is appropriate resource reuse, and having the wastewater treatment working, it's an opportunity for agriculture, and everything is very organized, and we take into account the urban upgrading if needed to find the type of solution that we are going to put in terms of containment. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have appropriate places to dispose for solid waste and wastewater, etc. However, we don't live in Disney World. And so it means that when anything is not working properly, it has a lot of effects on the other pieces of the puzzle. And for example, when we don't have, the first reaction is to drop everything into your drainage system. Well, we are in the Pacific. We all know that there would be storms. Climate change is real, is happening, and it will be worse. If we don't have our drainage system clean, because solid waste is not working, it will come to your drains. Same with sewers, and you will have flooding and downstream pollution. So all of them are interconnected, and all of them need to be considered when we think about the options if we want to have if we want to achieve the SDGs. So what is citywide inclusive sanitation? Basically, not rocket science, nothing that you don't know or you haven't heard, but it's just to think it through in a different way. And that's what we think we need to start doing if we want to achieve the SDGs. We need to think about everybody, and everybody means those million people in Lima that were never considered because they were not part of the sewer system. That means that we need to look at and focus on the entire sanitation service chain. We need to ensure we're looking at the linkages with other subsectors. We need to be able to have a diversity of technical solutions. I come from Colombia, and I think that most of my civil engineers in Colombia will be ready and perfectly trained to design and run the sewer system in New York, London, and other developed world cities. However, very few of them will have the knowledge and training to deal with the type of issues we need if we're going to achieve the SDGs. So we need to really incorporate and take to heart those other solutions so that we achieve the SDGs. So basically, this is what we are proposing as an approach, and think it through entirely in a holistic way. It's very important to have adequate management, because thinking about all these pieces will put a lot of pressure into the utility or the mayor or whoever is in charge of sanitation. So all this sounds great. However, the institutions and the service delivery and the financing needs to be there, because we're only complicating our world much more. So the good news is that there are some cities that are already doing this. And one example from this side of the world will be what Manila is doing. So in Manila, they're not only focusing on those households that have a sewer network, but those who have septic tanks. So this is happening and can be done. Same in South Africa, in Durban. This one, unlike the Manila case, that is a very sophisticated private concessionaire, this is a public utility. So it's not an issue of I'm public, you're private, this one is better than the other. It's how we approach it that I think would make the difference. So in this example, it's a municipal utility that is taking care and thinking about the whole sanitation service chain and doing an excellent job in their community. So basically, to conclude, I want to all know that you need to think more creatively, as the minister had suggested we do. There's not a one-size-fits-all for service delivery. We need to innovate, and we need to consider the whole sanitation service chain if we are going to achieve the SDGs. We at the World Bank are working on developing a website where we aim to put more of those cases where we see this has been done, guidance notes and TORs, and it's meant to be for the World Bank staff because, again, we're part of the sanitation community and we not always have been thinking about in this way, but we're trying. But it's also for our clients and for everyone. Everything that we have in our website is open, and so I hope you will be motivated to try to give it a try and visit us online. And then the person here, if you want to learn more, he'll be delighted to be contacted by any of you and continue developing a different approach that hopefully will get us through achieving the SDGs. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria Angelica. Just want to ask you one question before you go. It's going to be a slightly quick question, but I know you come from the urban sector, so I wonder if you just have any words of advice for the WASH community about reaching out to other sectors, for example, your colleagues in urban development, and what would you love WASH people to be doing in that regard?
Okay, well, first I think it's important to acknowledge the urban space and reach out to the mayor. So usually when we go to a city, we talk to the utility. In some cases, the utility is not even in charge of where the poor sit. So we're having the wrong conversation, or we are missing half of the conversation, or who knows what percentage. But it's very important to go to the mayor, because the mayor or the urban planner, because they know their city better. And when you're thinking about your options, would be important to understand what is happening, to know where the growth is. Sometimes the issue is, even within a city, people don't talk to each other. So there may be development plans in some places that will require a lot of pumping, and we will never catch up. Yeah. So having conversations with the urban planning will help us use our very scarce resources more efficiently and hopefully reach more people, which is actually what we all aim to do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.